Amelia Crawford had not set foot in Whitford for over 10 years. The small town seemed untouched by time, its cobblestone streets and weathered brick houses quietly waiting for her return. Yet the invitation in her hand felt like a summons she could not ignore. Her siblings, who had all settled into successful lives, wanted her at the family reunion. Leo, her son, sat quietly beside her in the car. He was different from other children. Soft-spoken, cautious, often lost in his own thoughts. Amelia worried about how he would face the crowded rooms filled with relatives eager to judge. As they approached the familiar town hall where the reunion was to be held, a wave of mixed emotions crashed over her. Memories she had tried to bury resurfaced: laughter, accusations, and the feeling of never quite belonging. The door opened and she stepped inside with Leo close behind. Eyes turned, whispers started, and the chilly atmosphere was thicker than the spring air outside. Amelia felt the weight of their stares, but it was Leo's silence that struck her the most. Then, in the midst of a hushed crowd, Leo's gaze met hers. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. The reunion hall was a modest building, but to Amelia it felt cavernous and cold. The soft hum of voices filled the air like distant thunder, while faces she once knew now appeared sharp with judgment or barely concealed curiosity. Each step deeper into the crowd made her heart pound louder. Leo clung to her side, his fingers gripping the fabric of her coat. He was quiet, his eyes wide as he took in the unfamiliar but somehow oppressive atmosphere. Amelia understood his silence. She felt the same way, an outsider among those who called themselves family. Her eldest brother, Martin, spotted them first. His smile was tight, eyes calculating. "Amelia," he said with a nod, voice clipped but polite. "You made it back." "Yes," Amelia replied, careful not to let the tremble in her voice show. "It's been a long time." Martin's gaze flicked to Leo, then back to her. "And this must be the quiet one," he said with a slight raise of his eyebrows. Leo barely nodded. As the evening wore on, old stories resurfaced. Whispers about Amelia's past decisions, her struggles as a single mother, and the life she had built away from Whitford. None of it was spoken aloud, yet the air thickened with unspoken accusations. Amelia's chest tightened every time she caught a glance that lingered too long. She remembered why she left, because she never wanted her son to grow up feeling less than, judged by those who could not understand the sacrifices she made. Leo, meanwhile, remained silent but attentive. He observed the grown-up smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, the forced laughter that echoed too sharply. He felt their unspoken doubts, but he also noticed something else, a faint glimmer of pain hidden beneath the coldness. When a distant cousin began recounting a story about Amelia's youth, a tale twisted by bitterness and misinterpretation, Leo's fingers clenched into fists. He had heard those stories before, but tonight something stirred deep inside him. A sudden urge to speak, to defend his mother, to break the silence that seemed to cage them both. But the room was watching, waiting, and Leo knew this was not the place to speak yet. Still, the seed was planted. Later, as Amelia stepped outside to breathe the cool night air, Leo followed quietly. The stars above were distant and cold, but in that moment, Leo made a silent promise to himself. He would find his voice. He would speak for both of them. And when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed the reunion were heavy with unspoken tensions. Amelia found herself caught between old wounds and the fragile hope that perhaps, after all these years, some healing might begin. Yet each glance and whispered remark reminded her of the gulf that had grown between her and her family. Leo, however, surprised her with a quiet resilience. Though he rarely spoke, his presence grew stronger with each passing moment. At breakfast, he sat by the window, sketching the view of the town he barely remembered. His drawings told stories no words could yet express. Amelia watched him, feeling a mixture of pride and concern. Leo was different. More sensitive, more thoughtful, but also stronger in ways she was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, as the family gathered in the garden, a conversation turned to Amelia's choices. The struggle she faced raising Leo alone and pursuing her art. Voices were low but sharp. Old judgments lingered like shadows. Leo listened carefully. Then, without warning, he spoke. His voice was soft but clear, carrying a confidence that caught everyone off guard. "Mother has worked harder than anyone I know," he said. "She never gave up on me, even when things were hard." The garden fell silent. Eyes shifted from Leo to Amelia, a new respect dawning in their gaze. For the first time, Leo's words pierced the wall of coldness that had surrounded them. Amelia's heart swelled. In that moment, she saw not just her son's bravery, but the beginning of a bridge, one that could mend the broken ties and bring her family closer. But even as hope blossomed, secrets long buried stirred beneath the surface, threatening to unravel everything they had just begun to rebuild. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the old family home, casting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Amelia sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in her hands, while Leo quietly flipped through a worn sketchbook. Outside, the world was waking, but inside, tensions simmered beneath polite smiles. The previous night's conversation lingered in Amelia's mind. Leo's words had shifted the atmosphere, yet beneath the surface, old grudges remained. Martin had avoided eye contact, and the others whispered behind closed doors. Amelia's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. A figure stood hesitantly on the doorstep. Clara, her youngest sister, whose sharp gaze often concealed unspoken feelings. "I need to talk," Clara said quietly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Amelia gestured to a chair, heart pounding. Clara's presence always stirred a mixture of unease and hope. "I know the family hasn't been kind," Clara began. "But there's something you need to know. Something about the past." The words hung heavy in the air. Amelia leaned in, sensing the weight behind them. Clara revealed a truth long buried, one that explained much of the family's distance and the whispered rumors. It was a secret about their father, a decision he made years ago that had fractured their family in ways none had dared to speak of. As the revelation sank in, Amelia felt a surge of emotions. Anger, betrayal, but also a strange relief. The shadows that had haunted her for years suddenly had a shape, a reason. Leo, listening from the doorway, felt his heart quicken. This was the moment he had been waiting for. A truth that could finally bring light to the darkness. But with truth came consequences. The family would have to face what had been hidden for so long, and Amelia and Leo knew the road ahead would not be easy. The revelation Clara shared echoed in Amelia's mind like a distant thunderstorm. She sat by the old fireplace, tracing the faded patterns on the mantelpiece, her thoughts tangled in memories both painful and long forgotten. The family's fractured past was more complicated than she had imagined. Leo remained close, his sketchbook abandoned for the moment as he watched his mother wrestle with the burden of truth. He understood that this secret was a key to healing, but also a test of their resilience. That evening, the house felt colder, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The siblings gathered again, faces shadowed by uncertainty. Martin's usual arrogance was tempered by a quiet unease, and even Clara's sharp eyes seemed softer, touched by regret. Amelia spoke carefully, choosing her words with care. She wanted to bridge the gap, to find a way forward despite the wounds. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion. "We cannot change what happened," she said, "but we can choose what comes next. We have to face it together." Leo nodded, feeling the weight of his mother's courage. For the first time, he spoke openly about his own struggles. How silence had been his refuge and his prison. "I was afraid," he admitted, "but now I want to be part of the story, not just an observer." The family listened, the walls of resentment slowly crumbling. In the quiet that followed, a fragile hope began to take root. The past was heavy, but perhaps it no longer needed to define them. Yet even as they reached for healing, a sudden knock at the door shattered the fragile peace. The unexpected visitor held news that would change everything once more. The door creaked open, revealing a man with weary eyes and a worn coat. His presence was unexpected, and the room fell silent as he stepped inside. Amelia's heart tightened with a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "I'm here because I knew your father," the man said quietly. "There are things you all need to hear, things that were hidden, even from you." The siblings exchanged uneasy glances, and Leo instinctively moved closer to his mother. The man introduced himself as Thomas, an old friend from their father's past, carrying with him secrets that had been locked away for decades. As Thomas spoke, the family learned of sacrifices their father had made, battles fought in silence, and the burdens he carried to protect them all. The story painted a man far more complex than the one they had known, a man flawed but deeply committed to his family's future. Amelia felt a new understanding blossoming within her, mingled with sorrow for the years lost to misunderstanding and pride. Leo listened intently, absorbing the truth that gave context to so many unanswered questions. But Thomas's visit also brought warnings. Old enemies still lurked, and the past was not finished with the Crawford family yet. The fragile peace was a fragile thread in a web of deeper challenges. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Amelia and Leo faced the reality that their journey was far from over. The path toward healing and personal strength was just beginning, and it would demand courage none of them had expected to find. The days that followed were filled with intense conversations and uneasy reconciliations. Amelia found herself navigating a maze of emotions: resentment, forgiveness, and the fragile hope of rebuilding what had been broken. Leo, though still quiet, showed signs of a growing strength, inspired by the unfolding truth and the resilience of his mother. Together, the family began to confront the shadows of their past. They revisited old letters, photographs, and memories that had been tucked away in dusty boxes and forgotten drawers. Each discovery brought new understanding but also stirred old pain. Amelia's siblings, once distant and guarded, started to lower their walls. They shared stories of their own struggles and regrets, creating small bridges across years of silence. Martin, in particular, surprised them all by admitting his own fears and the loneliness behind his tough exterior. Leo found himself slowly stepping out of his shell. He joined his aunts and uncles in long conversations, offered insights through his art, and even began to speak up during family gatherings. His voice, once timid and hesitant, grew steadier, carrying the quiet power of someone who had faced his fears and chosen to be heard. Yet, amid the tentative peace, a letter arrived, unsigned and ominous. It warned them to stop digging into the past or face consequences. The family knew the struggle was far from over. But instead of retreating, they drew closer, bound by a new sense of unity and determination. Amelia looked at Leo and felt a surge of pride. They had come so far, but the road ahead was still long. Together, they would face whatever came next with courage and hope. The morning of the town's autumn fair arrived, and the village of Windmere was alive with color, laughter, and music. Stalls lined the high street with home-baked goods, hand-carved toys, and the smell of roasted chestnuts. It was the kind of day that carried the illusion of peace, but Amelia felt a storm brewing beneath the cheer. Since the anonymous letter, unease had lingered in the household. Though the family had drawn closer, their past still loomed large. The truth about their father's choices, Thomas's warnings, and now the cryptic threat, it all pointed to someone who didn't want the past unearthed. Leo, dressed in a simple gray jumper and jeans, walked beside his mother as they approached the square where a small art exhibit was set up. To Amelia's surprise, several of Leo's drawings had been discreetly displayed by one of his uncles who'd noticed the boy's talent. The pieces captured quiet moments of the family, raw and honest depictions that moved onlookers to silence. As the afternoon wore on, Amelia spotted a figure standing too still near the display, a woman in a tailored black coat, dark glasses, her lips pressed into a cold line. Something in her posture felt off. Amelia's instincts prickled. The woman stepped closer to Leo's artwork, her eyes narrowing. Then, she tore one of the drawings from the frame. "You don't know what you're exposing," she hissed, loud enough for Amelia and a few nearby to hear. "Some things are buried for good reason." Gasps rose from the crowd. Amelia froze, her body tense, but before she could speak, a small but steady voice broke the silence. "Leave it," said Leo. The woman paused, looking down at him with thinly veiled contempt. "What did you say?" Leo's voice didn't waver. "I said leave it. You don't get to tell me what I can or can't draw. You don't get to scare my mum, or anyone else. What happened in the past wasn't our fault. But hiding it only hurts people more." The square fell utterly silent. Amelia stared at her son, heart racing. This wasn't the Leo she had to encourage through every anxious whisper, who once cried from stage fright at a school play. This was a boy who had found his voice, not in anger, but in quiet defiance. The woman's eyes flicked from Leo to Amelia, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. A cheer broke out. Someone clapped. Then another. Soon, the square erupted in applause, not loud, but respectful, as if recognizing the weight of what had just happened. Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she knelt beside Leo. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Leo simply nodded, his hand finding hers. "I just didn't want to be quiet anymore." Later that evening, The family gathered in the garden of the old house under string lights and a gentle sky. Thomas had returned briefly to say goodbye, but not before handing Amelia a small box of her father's journals, words that would help them continue understanding the man he had been. There was still healing to do, and not all questions had answers. But as laughter filled the air, and Leo's sketchpad rested in his lap, Amelia knew they had begun something powerful. Not just the mending of old wounds, but the building of something stronger in its place. It had taken courage, pain, and an unexpected voice to begin the change. And it started the moment Leo finally spoke.